Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody blessed today on Sunday. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's Scott Thomason. I'm the founder and the chief policy advisor with Village in Progress. We're a nonprofit in Omaha, Nebraska that works towards the preservation and the protection and the overall advocacy of human rights. We developed as a response. They say necessity is the mother of invention. We developed as a response to human rights protections that were lacking in our area, and specifically to improve services that don't fundamentally understand human rights prerequisite protections that should be incorporated into some of their service systems. So I just wanted to say hello to everybody, introduce myself. I hope everybody's having a good Sunday. Hope everybody have a good week next week. If you need to contact us, you can contact us at villageinprogressnebraska@gmail.com. We have a web page that we're building. I'm currently working on. I'm not really a website design guy, and we're a nonprofit. So everything we do out of pocket. We've had we've had food access awareness marches. I don't know what you want to call them, but we help people in our community who struggle with food access by literally going out and purchasing, gift cards for various restaurants or places to eat or whatnot, and passing them through the community, personally. Um, that all comes out of pocket. If we do anything, it's out of pocket. And so if anybody wants to donate services to help us build this page, we'd really appreciate it. But I bought a website about 2 years ago. It's called freegenesis.us. And you could go to it right now. Is still in the construction, so it's not much to look at. But I hopefully plan to have that up and running within a month. So right now, the primary focus of our organization is to provide a policy review for the Department of Health and Human Services where we live, because they supervise the overall wellness of the community. And I haven't had visitation with my daughter since September. Yeah, my little light just came on. Let me go ahead and plug this in, man. I don't want this cutting off when I'm talking. Have y'all wondering where I went? So, yeah, okay, that's better. So right now we're focused on providing them some feedback and some things that can help them improve their services, because I believe that when human rights are fundamentally incorporated into the processes, the policies, and procedures which are utilized within an organization, that it generally generates a sustainable and a positive outcome. Okay, so we believe that a lot of problems can be prevented like that. So I haven't had visitation with my child. I have a child that I have court-ordered split custody of out of a district court of the state of Nebraska, and I've been having custody of my daughter since she was born. So I've been raising her for 8 years. One day, the state preempted my parenting time. They still haven't really explained to us why. We've been asking why. We've been writing letters. We've been demanding meetings. We're at the point now where there's so much liability that goes along with the suppositions in these meetings that people won't take these meetings, because the implication that you cut off my visitation with my child because I was bringing her food while she was underweight is not only morally reprehensive, it's a violation of human rights, internationally recognized standards of human rights. It's a violation of state and federal law, but it's also a violation of their own policy. And then, not to mention that the stated policy at Department of Health and Human Services is helping Nebraskans live better lives. So at the end of the day, you just got to ask. My daughter was in the same house for 8 years. She was in the same school for 3 years. She's had the same pastor. She's been going to the same church most of her life. So about 8 years, she lives with her grandmother and myself. And, she has extensive relationships in the community. And so at some point you have to ask, what benefit is this to the child? Because that's the first thing she asked. And if you look at some of the videos that's here on this webpage, on this channel, you'll see that she says that specifically in the videos. I hadn't had any contact with my child, didn't have any contact with her since the date that she became a state ward. And still, we both asked the same exact questions. Like, you can separate two people. This is fundamental premise in law enforcement. Is you got 6, 7 people involved in something, you separate all 7 of them, okay? Not half of them. You don't put them both in 2 separate rooms and 3 and 4. You separate them all. And then you find out what the inconsistencies are in their stories, and that's where the investigation leads. And any cop will tell you that. That's 101. And so if you split us up and we haven't had a chance to talk to each other at all, we ain't had no contact, and they know it, because they don't allow us to have contact, because this is the government. They have the full force of the police behind them. Okay. So if they say, keep this dad from this child, and I show up at her school, I'm out of pocket. I'm in the wrong. And now I'm fighting with the police. And then that really sets a bad tone for my case to progress. But basically, since they have that full force, the things that they do are fundamentally important. And you can see I'm kind of riffing it. I'm going off the head. I'm trying to follow all these different progressions and stuff, where I'm trying to explain things along the way and follow these different issues that I'm trying to expand upon. And it's kind of difficult because it's so exponentially expansive. That's all. That's the only way I can describe it. Is it's real complicated, a lot of the stuff that we got going on. And it comes down to what's in the child's best interest. That's at the end of the day. Like I said, she hasn't been in the same school now more than a year. Since they intervened and they placed her, and they took custody of her. They took actual physical custody, because she's a state ward. Now she's placed within the custody arrangement, on one half of it. And that's kind of concerning in and of itself, because why is the government interfering in a private custodial dispute? And this is a civil dispute. This is a civic function, and they shouldn't really be. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, the only authority for the court to intervene is for the best interest of the child. So if she's disadvantaged by every one of their actions, then I would argue they don't have authority to do that. But that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to say what's up and say this is what we do. And, we work towards the protection of human rights, because I'm a pragmatist. So anytime you do problem solving, you do it in a series of progressive steps from the present to the past. So you walk backwards and you identify what preceded everything, every situation in a chronological order, and you find and determine the catalyst. And so I've determined that when you walk things back, basic human decency would have preempted this whole mistake, right? Why have we lost that in our society? Why have we lost that in our culture? The ability to assume the best of people absent any other reason to assume different. Like the idea that we are all fundamentally connected as humans, that we don't sit and divide ourselves into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller subsections until we can't fit any more people. Until we can't fit any more groups into our spectrum, until we're divided so definitively that how you can divide a person up by their differences until they're individuals. And then we're back at where we started, So the identity politics is fundamentally at odds with human rights. The idea that we all split up and we go to war with each other within a society. It's not a good advisement. And the people who are promoting that, we need to push back against that. We need to stop that. And we need to promote It's not so much about the rights of the individual as it is that protecting the rights of the individual protects the rights of all humanity, right? So you can't pick and choose when you apply these rights, or they're not human rights. The only thing that makes human rights what they are is the prerequisite function of protection. If they apply to me the same way they apply to you, if they apply to somebody in the ivory tower the same way they apply to somebody sleeping on a sidewalk, if they apply to everybody equally and indiscriminately, that creates a human right, because otherwise it's not a right. And when it's convenient for you to cry around about, oh, but these are human rights, doesn't count. And people will point to that to discredit your argument. Well, they weren't human rights for this person and this person and this person. So it's fundamentally prerequisite that we protect them for everybody. Otherwise, we don't have them for anybody. And so that's the reason why my daughter's in a bad situation right now. I think there's a lot of people across our country and our world right now that say, there's a war in Ukraine. There's a bad situation for a lot of people because we're not respecting people's fundamental human rights. And if you watch the UN Security Council, the Russian ambassador, the Russian delegate says, we've been raising issues for almost a decade. I think they said they've been uh, really frustrated in their efforts for the last 2 years. And every time that they've tried to put forth an issue or a resolution to the UN Security Council, some kind of a problem, something that they won't address, something that they won't mitigate it. And they've been asking to handle things diplomatically, with diplomacy. They've been asking to handle things in a nonviolent, constructive manner. And they've been asking for basically mediation, for these other state parties to be involved and to help give guidance. And people have been telling them, this is what the Russian ambassador says, of course. He says, and people have been telling us, this is Russian propaganda. This is nonsense, and you guys aren't worth listening to. As soon as he concluded his remarks, that's exactly what the ambassador from the United States said. And that was concerning because he just said, people disregard us and we have no alternative means of relief other than violence and outright war. And when Russia threatens nuclear readiness to the rest of the world, then everybody's on alert and they say, let's not intervene and let's not, oh, but poor Ukraine. Poor Ukraine. The best thing that anybody could have done to help Ukraine was to platform Russia's concerns, right? To resolve them in a diplomatic and constructive manner, and to um, at the very least, the idea of community, even if we're talking about a global community, is give and take. Okay, I give you some of my rights, some of my freedoms, right? And you need to give to the people. There's a give and take that occurs when in polite society, where people have basic basic fundamental respect for each other. And I feel like that's exactly what his grievance was. And he basically said that twice. Both of the statements that he made were consistent that, you can cry foul now, but who was the one bringing up the problem and trying to solve it, right? And that's what he had to say about it. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, and I'm not here to make opinions on the war. And of course, if I'm a human rights consultant and I'm a human rights advocate, then I'm going to oppose war, right? But the question is, how do we get there? How do we get to peace? That's what's in dispute. And what I'm saying is, you can't bulldoze people and railroad people and stonewall people and expect to have peace. And so it's frustrating for me because I relate that to the situation that we're going through, where we've been for a decade, and specifically for the last 2 years, have been raising complaint after complaint, enumerated complaints, right? Backed and premised by state law, federal law, international law of treaties signed after after the American government, the United States government made peace with the Lakota people, the Fort Laramie Treaty, 1868. That's an international treaty. The International Treaty of 1948, where the UDHR was created and the global community came together to establish a standard for fundamental human rights, prerequisite human rights after World War II, right? Because that was man on display at some of his worst, you know. I think that sometimes the agents that create change in our society are tragedy and suffering and immense struggle. And it's terrible that those have to be the prerequisite conditions. But sometimes they say diamonds come from pressure and, the furnace and the coal. And sometimes you can turn a loss into a win. And so that's why we're taking our time building this organization and doing it in the way that we're doing, because we want to be able to turn this into a win. We want to be able to have this from something destructive, bring something very constructive, and from something that was negative, make something positive, something that's creative, something that's productive. Yeah, like, and that's another way, that's the only way I see that I can really bring honor to my family after having suffered through this kind of horrible tragedy. I mean, I don't know what else you could call it. Somebody inflicting immense human suffering. There was a judge in 2015, Kenneth Van Pola, that said, the worst thing I see in this situation is that these circumstances are being created for this child. That these problems, these hardships, they don't exist in and of themselves. It's not, that the family is so devoid in poverty that, that they struggle against all odds to, no, this is a happy child, a healthy child that somebody has taken. He didn't say all that. He said the first part. He said that the worst thing about it is that these are circumstances that are being created for this child, and I believe that fundamentally sums up exactly what our grievance is. I had some difficulties with her mother that we disputed some parenting approaches, and I started mitigating those. As a parent, I mitigated those. So I was doing what I had to do to, without having a direct conflict and confrontation, to keep those from being a hardship for my child. And it was a headache. It's not easy for me to have to try and juggle all these stuff and balance. I feel like, I've said this before, I feel like one of those cartoon characters that walks behind somebody that's dropping plates and glasses and they picking stuff up, before they can hit the ground and break, and this person's so clumsy and knocking over everything. And that's kind of what I deal with. And so, you know, um, in steps the government, and they start to reinforce some of the destructive or less constructive behavior that I was cleaning up after, you know. And now I'm really frustrated that somebody would kind of reinforce or encourage stuff that shouldn't be happening. Now I got people cut off my visitation because my child was losing weight and I started bringing her food. That I don't understand how you could live anywhere in America and that be happening. And then I don't understand how it wouldn't be my, like, God given assignment, my place as a human being, and to see that kind of suffering inflicted on other human beings and to be in a position to stop it and to know the most about it, because I personally experienced it and I witnessed every part of the process and documented exactly how it occurs. And so I can see what has to go wrong within the process for something like this to go this bad, you know, what has to go wrong and what needs to get set right. And so, like I said, Jordan Peterson says, who knows why something bothers you, and why that thing bothers that particular person, in this big expansive world. And he said maybe that's your thing for whatever reason. That's your marker. It's your problem, and it's your job to rectify it. And I believe that. I believe that this is a job that is say in the Bible, that God basically doesn't trouble you more than you can bear, that God will give you trouble, but it's not anything that you can't handle. And that the things that he puts you through build character and build you strength and put you in a position to do his work later on in life. You'll be able to do, and the work of God is the work of loving your fellow man, like loving men and women as brothers and sisters, that we're all related, as children of God. So basically that we're all human. So it's the idea that humanity is all related, interrelated. We should all care for each other in that regard. We're all interconnected by that. And so in that regard, that's, like I said, that's why I'm about to go to church here in a minute. But in that regard, you have to look at things. You have to look at things from a fundamental perspective that Jordan Peterson, my bad, I'm sidetrack again, segueing this. Jordan Peterson also says that, in line with Nietzsche said, he who has a why can bear anyhow. And he says that the purpose of life is to have meaning, to find and sustain meaning. And that life may be to suffer or to struggle, but that is the realization of meaning, right? Because you struggle, you suffer for things that are important. And those things that are important is what gives your life relevance, what makes life worth living, as opposed to living a life based on searching for happiness. Because happiness, he said, it's fleeting and it's temporary. It's all these things. It's difficult to manifest or create. But aside from that, it's hollow. It's exceedingly hollow. What's the point of being happy? Have you ever been happy and then contrasted that with a moment that you've been fulfilled? You felt fulfilled, a moment you was really happy. Maybe you found this big screen TV that you always wanted, and it's Christmas time and stuff. So there's sales at all the department stores. You find this big TV and it's huge, and it's like a $2,000 TV, and you find it on sale for like $300 or $400, and it's brand new. I mean, it's not that the fact that you find it at a thrift store or anything like that. This is a brand new TV, and you just win, and you'll be happy about that. You'll be happy about that win. But you can't be nearly as happy about that as you can feel fulfilled if you were like watching your child graduate, walk across the stage and get a diploma that recognizes, a nationwide recognition, of their knowledge that they've acquired. I mean, and it's basic knowledge, and a lot of people graduate high school, and it's, a pretty formal function within our society, but that notwithstanding, that's an important thing. And that moment right there, that matter of fulfillment, is what Dr. Peterson suggests is the fundamental purpose of life. It's not to be happy. It's not to own things and have a yacht. Life is about, feeling good, living good, looking good. It's not. It's really not. Because that pales in comparison to the feeling of accomplishment and the feeling of the feeling of not only the accomplishment in itself, but the feeling of that connection to your fellow man, to humanity as a whole. To be able to be connected to humanity as a whole is a very big deal. And without it, when we lose some of that connection, you can study and you can research for yourself what it manifests in our society. I mean, you'll be able to see it pretty easily. I didn't have to put a lot of time and effort into that one. But it's not a good thing. It's not something we need to do. seeing each other less like people, less like humans, less like ourselves. It's not something we need to do. We need to see people more like ourselves and less like the enemy. Because otherwise, living in a country that's compiled of all these different religions, different languages, different traditions, there's no way to do that. There's really not. And if we focus on the differences between each other, because there's so many differences. But it's also been said, and I like Peterson said this as well. He said that human beings do have a lot of differences in a lot of ways that you can divide people so that they can play identity politics games. But fundamentally, there's more things that make us the same. And I inherently believe that. I think, even the differences between men and women, which might be the greatest differences, I think, that have been established by geneticists or anthropologists or anybody who tries to differentiate between different groups. I mean, there's different languages, there's different, most of those are voluntary differences. And so I would argue that the biggest genetic difference, the biggest biological difference is gender, sex, and gender, which I believe are the same thing. But that's neither here nor there. The point I'm making is that of all the differences, we could divide ourselves indefinitely. If people want to sit all day long and be like, you ain't like me, go sit over there. And you know what? I don't even want you sitting across the room from me. Go to another room. I don't even want you in the same building. Go outside. And we could do that all day long because the research shows that as much as people have a propensity to identify with each other, as a fundamental belonging to the human race, we also have a proclivity to distinguish and discern between each other based on very minor and minute differences. Like the stuff that I see people argue about, it blows my mind how my child could be caught up in something and disadvantaged by these types of biases when they're so petty. You know, I think the thing that agitates me most is agitators, right? Um, the thing that agitates me most is instigators, people who try to poke and pry to get under people's skin for nothing other than the source of, for the sake of causing conflict, for the sake of creating turmoil and trauma in our communities and in our society. They want to create division and animosity, and I don't care for that. And I think you'll see it sometimes if you see somebody who's like, I'm gonna give you an example. When I drive, I look in my rearview mirror when I'm changing lanes. You know what I mean? Because it's a safety issue. You look over your shoulder too, They taught me that when I was a kid. That you don't just trust the mirrors. You gotta check it out for yourself. But I look over my mirror. I look over my shoulder, I look in my mirror, I change lanes. Other than that, I'm not in my mirror because I'm driving, I'm driving forwards. So people that you'll see sometimes driving and looking in their mirror and stuff a lot, and then they'll get in front of somebody and they might slow down and they don't want to go the speed limit even. And it seems like they're trying to find a way to punish that person for being behind them in traffic, and show you kind of who's boss. Um, those are the kind of people I'm talking about. Stuff like that agitate me. It agitate the shit out of me. I ain't gonna lie. But at the end of the day, that don't bother me nearly as much as what's going on right now with my child or what's happening in Ukraine. Like, I mean, what's happening in Ukraine is a shame because it didn't have to happen. You know, there were ways to avoid it, you know, and everybody thinks it's a tragedy now, but nobody thought any of those solutions to provide relief or avoid conflict or anything like that were important before. But they they still don't think they're important, right? Because there's like an error in people's cognitions where they're not connecting one thing to another, right? But they will eventually, because they'll search for the reasons why something. That's how we came up with these universal human rights. That's what I'm saying. All this stuff is interrelated because, right, the war in Ukraine relates back to the fundamental prerequisite human rights that were established after World War II. In fact, the Russian ambassador, when they put Ukraine on nuclear, when they put Russia, excuse me, on nuclear readiness, I think it was Friday, he said, you know, um, the reason that we joined this UN council after World War II was because people recognized the fundamental depravity of war and how bad things can get, how bad man can be, how it shows the ugly, you know what I mean? The worst things about us. And that's what comes out when people go to war. And he knew that. And like not him. I'm not saying he's the one that enacted. I'm just saying like these men knew that. And that's why they did what they did. And so he's saying, yeah, we know war is bad, you know, and that's why we come to this table so that we can have a voice, so that we can avoid things like that. So it's important that in our society that we not only understand these things and we have tools, but also that we make use and we avail ourselves of those tools. You know what I mean? It does you no good to not understand how to be able to fix something. But it also does you no good to know how to fix it, but to not put that into action. Right? So we know that there's a greater need for diplomacy. We know there's a greater need for unity, right? We need less division. We need less posturing. Less you try me and find out, you know? A little bit of humility. A little bit of people saying, you know what? I could be wrong, you know? Or people saying, you know what? You could be wrong, but if it doesn't affect me or put me at risk or my kids, then you can be wrong, you know? That's another thing. Like I said, we got to do better. We got to think better. We got to have better solutions as a society, but we also have to be more forgiving, more accepting, more tolerant. You got to give people space I give people space to do stuff that I don't agree with at all. You know, it's the reason that I don't go out at night. I don't go out. I go to sleep generally about 8 or 9 o'clock. I don't go out at night because typically the people that are out driving around are coming from bars and they're drunk or not. You know, everybody, not to say that everybody that's out at night is drinking, but a lot of people are. And so what's the point of me being out and putting myself at risk for harm from something that I clearly recognize is not beneficial to a society? I speak to people about it when they'll listen. And I say, you shouldn't drink, man. It's not really good for you. What are you getting out of that? And when they don't want to listen, you know, or if somebody was to ask me my opinion on a public policy, you know, I would give it. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that I'm mad at people when I go in the store and I see somebody grabbing a case of beer that I shoot them a dirty look and you know what I mean? And I hold a grudge or walk around muttering under my breath about it, like, because it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Like, what you doing, I don't agree with. But I can distance myself from it so much that it's almost just not my problem, you know? And it could very indirectly be related to, you know, it could be my problem. It could be related to, you could get in a car crash and it could be somebody that's related to me, like my children on their mother's week or something, you know what I mean? So I don't know, you know, it could be anything. Like it could be indirectly related to me, but by large, I can avoid that. I can distance myself from that. So we need more of that in our society. If you don't like what kind of music they playing in that club, don't go in there. You know, people will go into the club, expose themselves to the music, be traumatized by the song, write a bunch of letters, hold a march, try and get the club shut down. Didn't like the language they was using in the song. I mean, there's a line, you know what I mean? It's important for people. People do have uh rights not to just be like overtly just disrespected and degraded, but I, I don't even think that's a fine line between that and somebody saying something that you don't care for and maybe don't listen so closely. You know what I mean? Maybe if you having your own conversation back at your table and stuff with the people that you came to the club with, you might not hear some of that stuff. And I mean, that's just the facts. You know what I mean? That sometimes people put themselves in a position to be mad about stuff. Like I said, every problem that I had with my child's mother, I worked to mitigate. At first I tried to speak to her about it, you know, that didn't work. I tried to see maybe if I talk to somebody that she has a lot of respect for, maybe they can talk to her about it. That didn't work. Okay. Maybe I can mitigate it. Maybe there's something that I can do that I can work around it, so that this isn't affecting my kid or anything like that. This is kind of, I can soak up that hardship or whatever like a sponge, I can get in the way of that. I can block that. And that's what I went with. And so, as opposed to, I don't know, man, marching and having my feelings hurt and this and that. And I'm not saying it's not good to march and organize and stuff. I'm just saying, for what? For what is the question? It's always the prerequisite question, is let's look at what's behind things. Let's let's look at what's behind why you're doing that. If you're doing it for good reason and for good cause, and it's the only way to do it, these are some of the Martin Luther King's prerequisites to nonviolent direct action. Are there other ways to address the situation that you're not recognizing? Have you exhausted all of your grievances? You know what I mean? Or your grievance procedures? There's other ways that you can go about things. And so, are you doing this? Are you creating uh, division and controversy for the sake of creating controversy? Are you doing this to a legitimate ends? Are you doing this to create some sort of relief or positive outcome? Or are you just trying to just stir stuff up? I mean, what do you? So you always look at what's behind things. And I think that's important. I think if we look at what's behind some of these wars, there's better ways that we can govern ourselves as a human race. I'm not gonna say as America or as this group or that group, as the human race, as humanity. There's better ways that we can go about this, and we need to find out what those are. And part of that discourse occurs through this right here, just talking. Nobody's even on right now in my lives. It doesn't matter. I'm still gonna put this up. Somebody gonna watch it. It's gonna benefit somebody, or it's gonna spark some discussion. That's cool. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter when you're doing something whether or not you can see. There's an immediate gratification that's overglorified right now within our society, where people need to feel immediate immediate gratification. They need to know right away I did something special, and and we don't need that. We need people need to humble themselves. We for real need to. There's 320 million people in America, just in America. And that's a lot of people. All, if if we wasn't so spread out, because a lot of land is spread out across, but if we weren't so spread out, it might be packed in like this. You know what I mean? That's a lot of people. When you got that many people, people got to have consideration for each other. That's fundamental. It's one of the prerequisites. It's like you start here. It's like in a hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This would be one of the things at the top, you know, and we're not doing it. We're not doing it in our society. Case in point, what Genesis is going through. Genesis should not be in the position that she's in right now. And she was doing work in a human rights organization. And for some reason, that offended our state. Like, the social worker told me there's a number of things that she took issue with. Among them was she campaigned to lower the speed limit at her school, because it's a private school. It doesn't have the public zoning laws applying to it that the state schools do. So when you have an elementary school, middle school, that's a state school. There's a public zoning law that requires that the speed zoning be as such, and we don't have that, because it's a church with a school at it, and they treat private schools differently for some reason in our statute. And maybe that's something else I need to look into. And like Peterson said, that's your problem. And who knows why it sought you out and why it bothered you. There were other parents who had kids that went to school there, and there were other parents who had kids that rode their bikes or walked to school there who weren't as bothered as I was by that speed limit issue. But for whatever reason, the roadkill that I step over on my way to the school, or the little boy that I saw trying to cross the street and looking back and forth, I don't know how to say it. I wouldn't say terrified, but he had a very concerned look on his face. His eyes were big and his head was zipping back and forth, watching the traffic, waiting for a chance to dart out and shoot across the street. I don't know what it was that bothered me, you know what I mean? But I know that school zoning generally in Nebraska is about 25 miles an hour. I think it's less in some places. And it is 35, but people go 45, because it's one of the only streets in the town that doesn't have stoplights on it, that cuts through from one side to the other. So it's got one stop sign. It's got one stoplight. And then it has 3 stop signs. And that's like 30 blocks or something like that. I don't know. But it's just one of the streets that people shoot down. So they get past that stop sign and they open up. And I don't need people going 50 by my kid, I don't. And so we pushed on the city a little bit. And she told me that that's not something that a child has any business doing. I can appreciate, your perspective and your opinion, but that's all it is, an opinion. I'm a parent, and I technically have a right to teach my child any damn thing I want, as long as it's not subversive or dangerous to society. I could teach her that, and teaching her to fight to lower speed limits at schools isn't necessarily a bad thing. But the second part is, it's actually a prerequisite of competent parenting, right? If I'm a competent parent, I'm required to address things that address my child. So it's like Jordan Peterson says, that's your problem. Who knows why it picked you out, why it attaches to you, why it assigns to you, and why that's your marker of what you need to, work on. Well, I fundamentally agree. This is my problem because it presents to me. It picked me out, It didn't have to be a high speed limit at that school, that just happened to be the circumstance when I enrolled my daughter in school there, because this is the closest school to our house. It's right across the street. So of course she's going to go there, and we go to church there. So it was just kind of a no-brainer. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Like, I didn't pick the speed limit. It was just there. So would I have noticed it? That's another thing that I wondered too, is would I have noticed it if my daughter didn't go to school there? If we just kept going to church there and she had went to a different school? And would I have picked up on it? And would it have bothered me as much? And these are the kind of things that I question myself on, because I like to know, my level of commitment to what's motivating me. Because like I said, it's the fundamental purpose of life is to follow your meaning. Is to have meaning, to understand what meaning is. How am I impacting the world, and what way am I contributing to it? If you're not contributing to it, then what are you here for, right? You're just taking up space. And I know that sounds harsh, but maybe that's just a call to action. Maybe it's just a call to say, well, think of something to do then, quit taking up space, and really find out what it is that motivates you, what's important to you, what is it that you're passionate about, that you can do something about that nobody else can. Because I got about 4 push-to-cross crosswalks installed around the schools here. I didn't know I could do that when I started trying to push. But maybe somebody else who would have tried wouldn't have been able to do it. So you don't know what your passion and what you're compassionate about, what it is that's important to you, what that can drive you to accomplish. You don't know. You don't know until you find out. So if you sitting around, if you stagnant, if you go to work every day and you go to the club and you got a cycle, a routine that might be fun, you might be happy, but it's not meaningful, then now's the time for you to change it up and ask yourself, what is important to me? You know, maybe don't go looking for it. It's probably already in your face. There's probably something that you're doing all that stuff to try and avoid thinking about. A lot of time, people who's out spending money frivolously and stuff like that, they got a monkey on their back. They got something that they trying not to confront, trying not to recognize and deal with. Is there something you avoiding? Because that could be your answer right there. That's what it is. That's what's bothering you. And you can fix it. All that energy that you taking and you turning towards running away from it or ignoring it or walling it in. And you don't have to do that. Because like I said, there's so much meaning found in impacting a problem positively that you recognize, or maybe you have a better understanding of than a lot of other people because you're in a better position. You're in a better position to fix it, to do something about it. And it's a very unique opportunity and it's a blessing. And so, like I said, all the hardships that I went through with my child, I I count it a blessing. I count it a blessing. There's a part of the Bible that say all of these things that I had, I can't, I'm not going to quote it word for word. So I'm going to paraphrase it. I hate to paraphrase the Bible. But it says something in the Bible about the things that I had and that I knew before Christ. I count them a loss now in comparison to Christ. And I feel the same way. Like all the time I was spending with my kid, I was having so much fun. And we were always at the park and the library, just like reading books. And I was watching her learn and teaching her stuff. And it was great. That was great. It was good for my soul. I was happy all the time. And that did actually have a lot of meaning in it. So I'm not saying that that didn't hold meaning, because that was very meaningful to parent a child and teach them things and give them the tools to be successful in life and to see the trust develop in a child, when you constantly are consistent and you are doing what the child need done in order to grow and be successful in things, and the child starts to recognize that, there's a trust that you'll see in that child's eyes when that child realizes that you for their best interest. It's a beautiful thing. So I'm not trying to minimize the value in parenting, but like I said, I used to be happy all the time, and just everything was, let's go roller skating, let's go. And the sun was shining, and we would ride, and like we used to sing every day. We would sing and dance literally every day. We would read about 3-4 books a day. Like we had a really happy life, and I mean, I was happy, and I'm still happy for those memories, and I'm glad that I gave those memories to my child. I'm glad she was happy, and that was important for her. But being happy isn't everything. You know what I mean? And I really do feel so much more fulfilled now being able to take these services that I'm having a very unique opportunity, because if you don't have a case, you can't even interact with these people, right? It's almost like a secretive organization. So you can't, there's not a lot of transparency there. And they're not going to tell you what they're doing. They can't tell you by law what they're doing with other people's kids and stuff, right? So there's HIPAA laws and there's a lot of rules, and you can't even talk to these people. So you have to have a case. And this opportunity that I'm having to be able to fix the services that have impacted her life, that have impacted my life, that have taken so much from us. I mean, my grandpa just died. We just buried my grandfather a couple months ago. This is literally killing people in my family. It's hard. It's hard to have somebody inflict suffering on you. And so the opportunity to be able to study this and find out what happened and how we can fix that, or at least impact it and mitigate it to a degree that it's bearable, or that we might make segue in towards making progress someday at a greater degree. So that's important. And it's almost something you can't quantify. You can't put a price on it. It's it's too big to measure. Something like that means so much to me that some days I don't know if I am worse off. I know my child's worse off. I know that she doesn't have her support system and a lot of other things, and that really bothers me. So it pushes me to really work hard on resolving some of these issues at a quicker pace. But like I said, the value in the research, the information that we're developing along the way, something like an investigation, is so invaluable because I don't think anybody else would have the stamina or the fortitude or the opportunity maybe to do it. That's another thing. Like, I'm a very unorthodox looking person. My demeanor's unorthodox, the way I talk, you know what I mean? And I'm off-putting to a lot of people, not palatable. In fact, I might be one of the least palatable people. Like, if you look at what groups of people have disdain for, and you put me in a room with those people and then that person, and you might see they might dislike me more than any of these people. Okay, I might get sometimes I get some of the worst treatment, and that gives me an opportunity to be able to see things from a perspective, like I can see how bad things can get, basically, you know, because there's some groups that might feel a little bit of pressure and some groups might feel a little bit more pressure. And I would say I'm one of the, I only like to use the word least likable people, but I generally think it's true. I'm not beholden to anybody. I don't I'm not interested in belonging to anybody's group or dividing into these different identity politics portions. So I generally don't have any kind of loyalties. So if you think I'm in this group because I'm speaking about that group, if you wait 5 minutes, I'll probably turn around and speak about the group that I'm standing in. And then that group will disavow me too. So generally we're on our own, you know. That makes for a hard life. But it also gives me great opportunities. Like I said, nobody else is in a position to evaluate these services like I am, because these services won't behave with other people in the way that they'll behave with me. I get a very rare perspective. And I love my daughter. I miss my daughter. I miss my daughter a lot. Like, I miss my daughter every day. In fact, I cry about my daughter every day. And I'm not too tough of a man to say it and to admit it. I cry about my baby. I miss my baby. But I compare it, it's akin to men going to war abroad, you know, and being stationed in Afghanistan or somewhere for years and not really much wanting to be there, but wanting to be there to make sure that, you know, things that are over there that you feel could be a threat to your child don't come over here to where your kid and your wife and your people are, you know. So maybe you're there fighting against some kind of developing terrorist incel that plans to come and blow up a, you know, a sporting event or, you know, a transportation system or something, or, and you're monitoring that and trying to keep that threat at bay. You might not want to be with your kids, but that's what parenting is. You know what I mean? It's sacrificing, it's prioritization, it's being able to look at things and say, this is important, yes, but this is important to me, and this is important to my child. And so that's greater than what's important to me. And it's hard to be able to do that. I don't think a lot of people are innately um, have that incorporated into their character. But it's a beautiful thing when a child needs it, when a child needs an advocate, when they don't feel like somebody's speaking for them and they feel voiceless, to be able to give them that opportunity to say what they feel, even if it's fleeting, even if you give it to them and then you're retaliated against for giving it to them. And then somewhere down the line, you suffer loss for what you did. That moment that you gave that child is going to be impactful. Then nobody can take that moment. People could take things from us, but they can't take our experiences. And so for that moment, for that child to be able to speak up for themselves and to have everybody listening and to recognize that people were listening. And for that moment, I felt like people were beholden to what's important to me or what's good for me, or they had to at least hear me. That's something that nobody can take away from my baby. She had that moment and she know what that's like now. And she know that it's out there. That if you say things in a way that people can understand them, if people are receptive to what you're saying, that there's relief, that there's ways to solve problems, you know, and she needs to know that. And so beautiful, you know what I mean? Like I said, it's beautiful. It can be ugly, but at the same time, it's beautiful. Human nature can be ugly sometimes, and you can see ugly sides of people. But the beauty is in being able to build something better than what we had yesterday and do it together as the human race, as human beings, to be able to build and expand on every idea, every perspective, every possibility, you know. The the idea that human beings are capable of exponential evolution isn't just an idea or a supposition. I believe it's well founded. I believe there's a lot of data, there's a lot of evidence to show that. I mean, we're doing things right now that we would have never thought were possible 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, they were doing things they would have never thought was possible 20 years before that. And so the proof is in the pudding. I mean, people do a lot of stuff. We could do a lot of stuff. There's no reason for us not to be going further. There's no reason for us to have some kind of like the fundamental and basic problems that we still have. Like the problem that people could talk each other into dividing into smaller and smaller groups so that they'd be easy to conquer and control and manage. That's we should have went we should have been outgrew that. Like we should have went past that like 10, 20 years ago. I mean, excuse me, 10, 20, 10, 20 generations, excuse me. We should have been able to recognize that stuff the minute we seen it on the forefront and know what it was and know that that's what we're looking at. So how did that happen? You know what I mean? How do we keep missing the what they call low hanging fruit? How do we keep missing the easy ones? You know what I mean? The home runs. We swinging at the balls and we're not even sure if they strikes that we swinging at. But here go the easy ones right here though. You know, that's easy. That kind of stuff, we shouldn't be making no rookie mistakes like that. We can't do that. The human race can't do that. And so, in order for us to get better and for us to go farther, for us to expand, one of the things we always need to remember is the fundamental premise that human rights are important because human rights is the basic respects that we have for our other fellow human beings, right? To be able to see them as you see yourself. So I could enumerate them right now, and I'll probably do that in another video and stuff. I just got to pop off of here because I got to get ready for church, but I could enumerate them. But like I said, it's basically one of those things where you already know what they are. They already, they what you would expect them to be, right? Like people are born free and equal, right? That's the first one. And that's something that you like look at yourself. Do you feel like you free? Do you feel like you were born free? Do you feel like nobody has any lease on me or any kind of ownership, any kind of rights to me? I'm my own person. You know, I was born, I didn't do anything to owe anybody anything. I'm not indebted to anybody. I'm just a person. You know, I'm a child of God. I'm born of God. You feel free? I mean, and then you apply that the way that you feel yourself. Just know that other people feel the same way. You know, you feel equal to everybody else. You don't look at other people and go, that guy's better than me, or that lady's better than me. You don't walk. I hope you don't walk around comparing yourself to people all day long and disappointing yourself. I mean, if you do compare yourself, I hope you would say something like, well, they might have more money than me, but I probably get to spend more time with my kids, and that's a blessing. because I don't have to work as much as they do to get that money. So you have to look at things in a balanced perspective. And if you're doing that, I think everything will be okay. I think humanity will be all right. So God bless everybody. I'm going to go to church, man. We'll sign off up here. Your boy Stag G, man. Village in Progress, Nebraska. Human rights.